Looking in the direction she pointed, I saw my husband's smartphone, its case and screen shattered from the accident. Then she pointed at the messenger icon, saying, "This." Wondering what was going on, I cautiously opened it, asking, "What's this?" I immediately stripped off all the patient pants my husband was wearing, checking every nook and cranny, and there it was. I couldn't help but cover my mouth with my hand. "My name is Heather. It's been a few years since I got married, and now we have one child. My daughter's name is Amy. She goes to the nearby kindergarten and loves her friends, being a favorite among the kindergartners. After graduating from a pastry school, I started working at a restaurant and met my husband, Richard, there. He was 4 years older than me, a mid-level chef who was bright, handsome, and popular among the part-time girls who often asked him out for meals. So when Richard and I, who were plain and unremarkable, announced our marriage at work, our colleagues and customers were quite surprised, and some of the girls even harassed us. Upon finding out about the pregnancy right after the marriage, I quit my job and dedicated myself to childcare for a while. Then, when Richard turned 30, we opened a cafe on the ground floor of our house. Richard, who had always dreamed of having his own shop since childhood, I remember seeing his face sparkle like a boy when he saw the finished interior. To support him, I helped out at the cafe alongside childcare, focusing on new menus and attracting customers. Our cafe was located in the middle of a residential area, so during lunchtime, it was mostly occupied by housewives. Taking note of this, we started hosting a simple cooking school at the cafe on our day off once a week. Rumors spread about being taught by a good-looking former restaurant chef, and to my delight, the cooking school now has a long waiting list of students. "The cake recipe you taught us last week was a big hit with my son and husband." "That's great. Feel free to come for lunch with your family next time. Our chef will surely be delighted." "Of course." Customer feedback like this is what motivates us more than anything, my husband said cheerfully while finishing up the cooking, humming a tune. Every time I witness such moments, I feel truly grateful from the bottom of my heart that we were able to open this cafe. The management of the restaurant was on track, and with Amy starting kindergarten this spring, I was looking forward to working harder. But just then, unfortunate news reached our family. Every time I witness such moments, I feel truly grateful from the bottom of my heart that we were able to open this cafe. The management of the restaurant was on track, and with Amy starting kindergarten this spring, I was looking forward to working harder. But just then, unfortunate news reached our family. A call came to the shop informing us that Richard's father had suddenly passed away from an illness. His father, who was still active as a business owner and in good health, had never seemed sick to us, so his death was unbelievable to our family. I urged my husband to quickly inform the rest of the family, but I could see a slightly bitter expression on his face. I immediately knew who he was contacting by that expression. It was Richard's brother, John. Although Richard and I are 4 years apart, I've heard from my husband in the past that he had a troubled past, causing trouble at school and work many times, not to mention the numerous times he had run-ins with the police. Since then, neither my husband nor I had any contact with him, and my husband had been avoiding us meeting John. However, it seemed like that wouldn't be the case this time. After a brief conversation over the phone, my husband's somber expression conveyed a warning: the funeral is coming, but his face also warned, be careful of him. My husband's strong reaction made me curious about what kind of person he really was, but just mentioning John's name from my mouth was enough to sour his mood, I'm sure. We started preparing for the funeral in earnest the next day, but there was much more to do than I had anticipated. Time flew by, and before I knew it, the funeral was over, and Richard's father's ashes returned to my husband's family home. The atmosphere remained somber even after we returned home, so my husband and I tried to distract ourselves from the sadness by reopening the cafe the next day. Our customers seemed to have been waiting for the reopening, as the day went by in a blur of busyness, and I felt like I couldn't remember much about my father-in-law. As I was about to let myself succumb to exhaustion and sleep without thinking about the sadness, I couldn't. Because as closing time approached, the last person my husband would want to see arrived at the shop. Long time no see, Richard. Well, I did see you yesterday, but you came all the way to the shop. How about serving us dinner for two? Hey, Rachel, it's fine to have dinner here tonight, right? Huh? In this shabby place? Well, whatever. By the way, this place is so small. It was Richard's brother, John, and his wife, Rachel. They sat down at a table without permission and started looking at the menu. While muttering, troublesome guy came, Richard came out of the kitchen. What are you here for? I'm pretty sure I told relatives not to give you the address of our shop. Besides, we're already closed today, so please leave. Well, it's not that simple. I have something important to discuss. I came all the way here. You seem to be running your own shop and making quite a bit of money without any stress, right? While we work desperately every day and only get peanuts for pay. So, it wouldn't be a problem for you to just hand over all of Dad's inheritance to me, right? It's enough that you say you'll give up all of the inheritance. While saying this, Richard continued to look at the menu without looking up. It seems John came to persuade us because he wanted to monopolize the inheritance. I wouldn't just say okay to that kind of talk. The inheritance will be distributed as planned among the siblings. Whether you agree or not doesn't matter, and this isn't a place for you to be. Please leave. As Richard replied, John looked up from the menu and glared silently at Richard, then kicked the table hard with his foot. I was surprised by the sudden action, as the wooden table crashed loudly onto the floor, menus and decorations scattering around. Richard, can't you just listen to what I, your brother, have to say? You've been disowned by Dad once. You're no longer my brother. You're a stranger. Despite John appearing to be at the peak of anger, Richard remained calm, not changing his expression. I see. I understand your position well. However, you'll regret defying me. Turning red with anger, John grabbed Richard's collar. After saying this, he and Rachel left the shop. The floor looked scattered as if a storm had passed, and the shop fell into silence. The only relief was that Amy was already asleep in her room and wasn't involved in the commotion. But the real storm began the next day. The next morning, when I went out to open the shop, I found large graffiti sprayed on the shutters. What's this? It's terrible. Insults like terrible food or never coming again were written in red letters, standing out. I immediately reported it to my husband and tried to clean the graffiti, but soap and water alone couldn't remove it. Reluctantly, we contacted a professional cleaner to have it cleaned. Furthermore, during the day, we were asked by customers, with quite anxious faces, "Hey, I want to confirm something. Is it true that you use expired ingredients in this shop?" This happened several times. When I asked them for more details, it seemed that someone had posted on the internet that they had stomach pains after eating our food, or that the food smelled rotten when they ate it. I heard that there had been an increase in the number of word-of-mouth reviews on the internet, which stated things like, "I had stomach pains after eating our food." I was concerned because there had been a large increase in the number of word-of-mouth reviews on the internet. Panicked, I explained that we never serve dishes that endanger customers' safety and that there had been an increase in prank reviews on the internet lately. However, all the customers seemed to remain suspicious. If there really were cases of food poisoning, it would be a big problem, but so far, there had been no reports of such patients from the health department. I was convinced that it was the work of those two. The harassment continued to escalate, with silent calls, negative posts on social media, and even spreading rumors deliberately tarnishing our reputation in front of the shop. Although the number of customers gradually decreased, regulars and acquaintances who knew us well increased their visits to the shop, bringing along friends, showing their support. For my husband and me, it was deeply appreciated and heartwarming. However, no matter how much they supported us, the harassment didn't stop. If the harassment was directed only at me and Richard, we could endure it. But if it turned against Amy, it would be irreversible. Once I started thinking that way, I couldn't sleep at night out of fear, and I couldn't focus even when Amy was at kindergarten, and my husband seemed to be in the same state. After discussing with Richard, we decided to give a portion of the property to John and Rachel before the harassment got worse and Amy was put in danger. One day, I went to the usual market in the morning for shopping. I thought there would be few customers on a weekday, but I felt a strange unease as I hurried back to the shop to make it in time for opening hours. Despite the opening time being near, the shutters remained closed. Feeling odd, I went around to the back door and entered the shop, but the room was eerily quiet, and Richard was nowhere to be seen.
"Mommy!"
I heard Amy's voice from the back of the shop, so I quickly put down my things and headed towards the direction of the voice.
"Amy! What are you doing in such a dark place? Weren't you supposed to go to kindergarten with Daddy?"
Amy shook her head anxiously. "No, you see, Mommy, I dressed myself, but Daddy went outside. So, I waited here." Feeling sorry for how long she must have been alone in the shop, I instinctively hugged her tightly. "I see. You did a great job waiting alone. By the way, why did Daddy go outside?" Daddy and Uncle John and Aunt Rachel were here, and they all went out to play, leaving me behind." The names that came out of Amy's mouth made my eyes widen. My heartbeat accelerated, and a vague sense of unease swelled within me. "I'm sorry, honey." I sat Amy down on a chair and hurriedly took out my phone to call Richard. But he didn't answer the phone at all. I tried calling again after hanging up once, but it was still no good. They were taken away by those people over the inheritance issue. Then how should I go about finding them? With John's violent and volatile nature, involving the rough and tough police would be risky. What if he does something to my husband? Should I contact the police just in case? As panic gripped me and my mind raced, it was Amy's voice saying, "Mommy, I'm hungry," that brought me back to reality. I had left breakfast to Richard, thinking I'd be back from shopping in time, but it seems he left before feeding Amy. There's no way we can open the shop today. After temporarily closing the shop with a sign outside, I returned home to prepare breakfast for Amy. As I sat at the table to eat with her, I glanced at the clock and saw that it was nearly noon. Just as I was about to check my phone for any missed calls from Richard, an unknown number called. "Hello. Who is this?" "Hello. I'm with the paramedics. Are you Richard's wife by any chance?" The word paramedic sent a chill down my spine, and the unpleasant thought I had just imagined resurfaced in my mind. While clutching my smartphone tightly, I quietly listened to the person speaking. After the conversation ended, I quickly took Amy and left the house. My hand holding Amy's was visibly shaking. According to the paramedic, Richard had darted into the street and collided with a truck. He had suffered severe injuries and was currently being transported to the hospital by ambulance. With my head in a panic, I drove to the hospital, desperately trying to calm myself with the thought that Amy was in the car. Upon arriving at the hospital, I rushed to find Richard, but a nurse informed me he's in critical condition and undergoing emergency surgery. No time for details. Amy and I were left waiting, and I stared intently at the operating room light. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I noticed Amy had fallen asleep using my lap as a pillow. From the window at the end of the hallway, I could see the evening sky tinged with red. My hands, still shaking since noon, gently stroked Amy's head, making a soothing sound. Then the light went out, and the doctors and nurses emerged. "Are you his wife?" "Yes, that's me." "How is Richard, my husband?" "Please be assured, your husband has pulled through. However, he has not regained consciousness yet. It all depends on his physical strength and vitality now."
"Oh no!"
Richard was moved to the ICU, and I sat beside him, staring at his face, showing no signs of awakening. Feeling drained and overwhelmed by anxiety about the future. I wondered what would happen if Richard never regained consciousness. No, I couldn't afford to think like that. I gripped my husband's hand, trying to dispel the anxiety and praying for his safety. Then I noticed Amy tugging at the sleeve of my shirt. What's wrong, Amy? Are you tired? Shaking her head, she pointed at Richard's smartphone with a cracked screen and case. Look at this. Dad said it's a secret from Uncle John and the others. Then she pointed to the line app icon, saying, this one. Suspicious, I hesitantly opened it. I saw a barrage of messages that seemed like threats sent from John, now called John, to Richard. Scrolling through, the messages appeared to have been sent over several days. But among them, I discovered a terrifying image and involuntarily stopped scrolling. What is this? Amy and a utility knife? The image showed a man's hand holding a utility knife and another of Amy playing in the kindergarten playground, taken from a distance with a zoom lens. Beneath the images was the message, your thigh won't be enough. Hand over all the inheritance. I quickly removed Richard's hospital pants and found a cut among the injuries, likely from a knife. Feeling a deep sense of horror about what John had done, I involuntarily covered my mouth with my hand. I knew he was a violent man, but I never imagined he would actually take action. Thinking there might be more threatening evidence, I checked Richard's smartphone again. As I suspected, there were messages left in other apps, including a recording of this morning's conversation between Richard and John. I needed to confirm what happened at the store. With trembling fingers, I pressed the play button. The content was indeed from this morning, but it was so horrifying that my face turned pale, and I accidentally dropped Richard's smartphone due to my trembling fingers. As I sat in the chair, dumbfounded, John and his wife entered the hospital room. Instead of showing concern for Richard's condition, John blurted out, given his condition, he's got a few days left at most. Have you contacted the funeral home yet? When is it going to be? We're busy, so you better hurry up and decide. Wow, he's a goner for sure. My condolences. While they casually asked me, I was seething with anger at John and his wife. Clenching my fist, I glared at John. What? What's with that look? What do you think we did, huh?
What did you do, you ask? Just stop showing your rotten nature. John, he left all the evidence to tell me what you two did.
I blurted this out and played the earlier conversation from Richard's smartphone again. The recording started with John and his wife coming to the store while I was out shopping. You two again. What do you want this time? We came to negotiate directly since you won't hand over the inheritance, no matter how long we wait. You saw the photos we sent, right? After a pause, there was a commotion as Richard hurriedly left the store. The sounds of Richard's heavy breathing and footsteps on the ground suggested he was running. Probably to get away from the store to avoid harm to Amy. However, John's voice could be heard shouting, "Wait, you bastard," followed by, "Do you care what happens to your daughter? You know she's still inside the house, right? We won't guarantee her safety unless you hand over all the inheritance." Fine. I'll give you all the inheritance. Just promise me and get out of my family's life. Right after Richard screamed that, the sound of a truck's brakes and the screams of passers-by filled the air. Then the recording stopped. It's because you two came to the store that Richard. Before I knew it, I was crying and shouted at John and his wife through tears.
What are you talking about? There's no evidence we pushed him.
How strange. She never said anything about being pushed, did she? Suddenly, John turned around at the sound of an unfamiliar voice from behind. I'm from the East Police Station. We received a report of an attempted murder, so I came immediately. The detective introduced himself while showing his badge. Unprepared for the police's arrival, John and his wife froze, their expressions turning pale. Indeed, after listening to the recording, I had immediately contacted the police. Are you the one who called, Heather? Yes, that's me. Thank you for coming all the way to the hospital. Hearing this, John and his wife muttered "you jerk" under their breath and glared at me with bloodshot eyes. They wanted to hear more details, so I explained everything meticulously, showing the evidence I had collected from the past harassment to today's incident. While I was explaining, another detective arrived and handed over a laptop, saying, "Here's the surveillance footage. Please check it." The detective who was listening to me checked the footage, which was indeed from the scene of today's incident. Fast forwarding to the time of the incident, Richard, followed by John and his wife, appeared. It seemed like there was a commotion, and it looked like John's wife pushed Richard. "By the looks of it, you two are wearing the same clothes in this footage, so it's definitely you two, isn't it?" Though it was clear they were the ones in the footage, John and his wife remained silent, unwilling to admit it. Then, Rachel, who had turned pale since the police arrived, spoke up.
"No, that's wrong. I didn't push him, I just reached out because he was staggering."
She hysterically raised her voice, trying to make excuses, but the police presented more evidence. The detective switched to a different footage, this time showing a truck's dashcam. In the video, Richard appeared on the left side of the screen, and she was seen forcefully pushing Richard's back, causing him to tumble in front of the truck. After seeing this footage, do you still claim you just reached out to him? What do you say? Unable to make any more excuses, Rachel collapsed to the floor. At that moment, miraculously, Richard woke up.
"Richard, are you okay? I'll call the nurse right away."
Awakening, Richard started to move his mouth as if trying to say something. "Let me explain." "Richard, you can talk? Take your time, it's okay." Hearing my words, Richard slowly nodded and began to reveal the truth about this morning's events. After rushing out of the store, he was quickly caught up by John and Rachel. He disclosed how they had threatened him. He also revealed that John grabbed Richard, who was not responding to his demands, and that during the struggle, Rachel pushed him as hard as she could.
"Don't bullshit us. We don't know anything."
John, denying the truth that Richard had told, began to act out and tried to resist when a detective attempted to restrain him, eventually hitting the detective in the face. His assault led to an arrest for obstructing law enforcement, as John was subdued and arrested by several detectives. Rachel, too, kept screaming, "It wasn't me. I just reached out to help," but was eventually handcuffed and taken away. Having witnessed everything, I suddenly felt all strength leave my body and slumped into the chair. "Richard, why did you keep quiet about being slashed?" "I didn't want to worry you, Heather, since the harassment continued and you were always there for the cafe and me." "I'm sorry," Richard said, looking remorseful, and I was left speechless. Later, the police revealed that the motive behind John and Rachel's actions was indeed to target our family's wealth, resulting in their disinheritance. John, even after being disowned, had not held a steady job and had been lavishing money on a hostess at a familiar club, accumulating debt, while Rachel indulged in luxury goods with the borrowed money. Eventually, they resorted to loan sharks and were chased by debt collectors, growing tired of such a life when they heard of the father's death. Their share of the inheritance would only cover their debts, leading them back into a cycle of borrowing. That's when they targeted our wealth, thinking they could use Amy as leverage to make us comply with their demands. They forced Richard to promise the inheritance, but believed that if Richard himself were gone, they could get all of the wealth unconditionally. Due to the egregiousness of their harassment and motive, John and Rachel received a prison sentence and would be incarcerated for several years. Weeks after the incident, my husband's injuries finally healed, and we were able to reopen the cafe. Amy could safely attend kindergarten again, and I believed our family could continue to live peacefully. Yet I carried an unsettling feeling since the day Richard was brought to the hospital and I had to remove his pants to check his thigh wound. However, I couldn't pinpoint the source of this unease and felt troubled. One night, Richard went out to celebrate his recovery with friends and came home drunk late at night. He fell asleep on the sofa, and as I thought it must have been fun after a long time and started to change him into his pajamas, I realized what had been bothering me. My husband's leg hair, which had always been there, was completely gone, leaving his legs as smooth as a woman's. While it's true that the trend of beauty-conscious men has grown, Richard was never the type to engage in such grooming. He kept himself clean because he worked in the kitchen, so why would he suddenly go for hair removal? Suspicious, I consulted with a friend knowledgeable about such trends on the same day. She told me that nowadays, women prefer androgynous men who are careful about their appearance over the traditionally masculine ones with leg and chest hair. So, many men nowadays opt for hair removal to be more attractive. For attractiveness, huh? I see. Thinking this was my chance while he was drunk, I decided to check his line messages. I easily unlocked his smartphone with his birth date. Opening Messenger, I found a chat with someone named Karen at the top, saying, "I had a great time today. Will I see you next at the cooking school? Can't wait." It was clear they had been interacting until just before. This Karen, a student who has been attending every week despite the cooking school being notoriously hard to book, was someone I remembered well. She was noticeably younger and cuter compared to the other mostly older students, standing out significantly. It seemed the supposed celebration with friends was a lie, and he had been enjoying his time with Karen from the evening until now. Unbelievable. All the memories of nursing him every day in the hospital, and helping with the cafe, flashed back in my mind, fueling a resolve that he would never be forgiven. I meticulously saved the remaining chat history with Karen and their couple photos, well organized in an album, onto my smartphone. The cafe that we used to run together as a loving couple now seemed irrelevant. Strangely, all the emotions of supporting each other through life with my husband were turning into nothingness. Preparing for my revenge against my husband's betrayal, I meticulously planned for days without missing a detail. Then, on the day of the cooking school, where I had gathered ample material for retaliation, an unsuspecting Karen arrived smiling and greeting the other students. "Hello," she greeted me cheerfully, her face seemingly smug with triumph. When the time came and everyone, including my husband, was assembled, my revenge commenced. As usual, I handed out papers to the students, supposedly with today's recipe. "Today's recipe uses familiar ingredients," I said while replacing the handouts with the exchanges and photos of my husband and Karen, and distributed them to everyone, including them. They quickly realized what it was and started shaking. "What is this doing here?
What is this? Don't look, everyone!"
The other students, recognizing my husband and Karen, began murmuring, asking questions like, "Isn't this the chef and that student? What's going on?" Given his image as a handsome, former restaurant chef who seemingly ran a cafe harmoniously with his wife, the housewife students started a backlash. "I never thought he was like this. I will never visit the cafe again. This is sickening," they said one after another, and everyone but Karen left the place. "Well, everyone's gone now. The rumors about you two will spread quickly, and this cafe is finished. Can you leave now? I don't want to see your face anymore. After all the care I gave, what a way to repay me," I said coldly, avoiding eye contact with Richard as I put away the kitchen tools the students were supposed to use.
What have you done? How could you do something that drives away the customers we've painstakingly gathered?"
Richard yelled, perhaps out of embarrassment or anger, or maybe both, as if he was about to hit me. "I'm not joking. I have no intention of continuing with this cafe, and I plan to shut it down immediately. Besides, you're worried about the cafe after cheating on me? I've completely lost respect for you."
"What does that matter now? We were finally getting the business on track. You can't just shut it down. Who do you think built this place?"
"Who built it, indeed. It's true you wanted to own a cafe, but I was the one who actually paid for the construction of our home and cafe. Yes, I was the investor in the cafe. It turned out after we got married that Richard, who had worked in restaurants, was bad with money and had hardly saved anything. I had saved money from my days working at a restaurant, so when Richard wanted to open a cafe and asked me to sponsor it, I agreed. I hate to say it now, but I've already put the building up for sale. Tomorrow, the agents will come to clear everything, so please pack your things and leave today."
"What? I haven't heard anything about this. And packing up today, how can you spring this on me all of a sudden?"
"Then forget the stuff, just get out now. Can't you understand I can't stand to breathe the same air as you for one more second? Why don't you stay with Karen? With a look of realization, Richard turned to Karen. Karen, please help me. I have nowhere to go if I'm thrown out of here. You said the other day you wanted to break up with him and live with me, right? Desperately, my husband grabbed Karen's arm, pleading.
What? No way. I'm annoyed being bossed around by that woman. Besides, I live with my boyfriend. You were just a convenient fling because you're somewhat handsome, old man.
My husband, whose recent exchanges with Karen on Messenger seemed like a lie, was left gaping in disbelief at her attitude.
Wait, Karen!
Ignoring Richard's call, Karen left the cafe without looking back at him. Then he turned to me.
Heather, I was wrong. I apologize for everything. Please let's start over, I beg you.
I financed your dream, cared for you, and this is how you repay me by cheating? I can't imagine living with you again. Besides, I've already found a new place for Amy and me to live. We're moving out tomorrow after finalizing everything. I've prepared the divorce papers, just come to pick them up tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, I left Richard alone in the cafe and went upstairs to our home, locking the door behind me. I didn't want Richard to enter ever again. After a while, I saw Richard leave the upstairs home, allowing me to sleep peacefully that night. The next day was busy with movers and waste disposal services clearing out our home and the cafe, leaving it empty. When Richard contacted me to pick up the divorce papers, I hurried downstairs with Amy. We had already packed, ready to move to our new home. I seemed even more resolved than the day before, but I no longer needed to worry. Here, it's filled out, just file it, I said, handing him the divorce papers and leaving with Amy. I filed for alimony against Richard and Karen. Despite Richard's inheritance, he had debts in his name, not related to the cafe, and his daily life became a struggle with repayments, alimony, and child support, leading to a poor lifestyle and despair. Of course, he does not have the financial strength to open a new restaurant, so he is now doing field work in a rural area. He didn't return to restaurant work, seemingly too proud to start from scratch. I thought little of him, but as long as he paid the alimony and child support, it didn't matter to me. When I was getting used to my new life, I opened a cafe in a quiet town. It was small compared to my previous cafe, but I consulted with an architect and built it with great care so that I, now a single mother, could operate it by myself. Perhaps because of its mom and pop concept, which makes it easy for customers with children to visit the restaurant, it is becoming so popular that it has even been featured in the local newspaper. Amy was thriving in our new, nature-filled town, and watching her grow was my joy.
Today's dinner is your favorite hamburger, Amy. How about that? Yay! Mammy's hamburgers are the best in the world. I want ice cream for dessert.
Our happy and cheerful conversations made each day special, with her innocent laughter warming my heart. Wanting to protect her smile forever,
I held this strong desire close as we walked hand in hand to the park. I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed.
Following that, my mother-in-law also said something terrible: a useless person should just get divorced and leave. Upon joining us, my father-in-law seemed to understand the situation and yelled, "A wife who can't bear children doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Roy quickly and let him marry Hannah." Being told such unreasonable things, I just stood there in silence. It was the first time in my life that I was made to feel so miserable. But at the same time, my resolve became unshakable. The time had come for me to raise the signal to counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I was hurt and about to cry, looking down on me like that. Defying their expectations, I said with a broad smile, "I'm already divorced, you know? And that woman." Hearing my words, my in-laws and Roy gasped in astonishment, uttering a pitiful "huh?" The betrayers were shaking upon discovering the shocking truth. My name is Emily, and I'm a 31-year-old part-time. I married Roy 3 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. When we got married at 28, I was working full-time, and continuing to work would have guaranteed a solid career. That's why I wanted to build my career until I turned 30, then have a child and return to work more easily once childcare became manageable. Roy understood that, and we agreed to start trying for a baby after I turned 30. So, when I turned 30 and was about to start trying in earnest, I went for a checkup just in case, as a friend who was also trying was struggling with infertility. The result was that I found out I have a condition that makes it difficult to conceive, and I decided to switch to part-time work to focus on fertility treatments. Roy works at a real estate company, and we can live comfortably on his salary alone. We were also able to save a little every month, so he was okay with me working part-time. But that's when the nightmare began. Once it became clear I had fertility issues and switched to part-time, Roy's attitude changed drastically. He used to be kind, but suddenly he said, "I'm full-time, you're part-time, so you should take care of everything at home. If I don't earn money, we can't even afford fertility treatments, let alone live. You need to perfectly manage the household to avoid stressing me out." I was good at household chores since I lived alone, so it wasn't too painful. But Roy started to nitpick everything. If the room was a bit messy, he'd say, "You're lazy. What kind of housewife leaves the room this dirty?" And if the dishes weren't washed right after a meal, he'd say, "A woman who puts off even this isn't cut out for a family. Then work more and earn. There are remote jobs and such hiring, right? Well, you're still in charge of all the household chores since you're part-time and I'm full-time." I had just found out about my infertility, so I was feeling down, thinking it was somehow my fault despite Roy being fine. So I wanted to create a relaxing space at home for Roy, who was tired from work, and tried to meet his expectations. Looking back, I realize Roy was just taking advantage of my weakened state. At that time, I convinced myself to endure until I got pregnant, suppressing my feelings. I thought Roy would return to his kind self once we had a child. Hoping for a sliver of hope, I continued with fertility treatments while managing part-time work and household chores. But the strain took its toll, my health deteriorated, fertility treatments weren't going well, and the gap between us grew. Gradually, I couldn't keep up with the housework, my feelings were a mess, and I became more emotional. Roy then said, "You can't even get pregnant and act all high and mighty. If you don't want to be divorced, listen to me." From that day, he clearly looked down on me. He said I was acting all high and mighty just because I asked him to put his socks in the laundry basket instead of leaving them around, and he yelled, "Shut up." So, I spoke up a bit more firmly. Being looked down upon like this made me feel miserable, and I didn't even know what to do anymore. And Roy began to treat me not as his wife but as a convenient woman or a servant, and my heart grew more and more troubled. A year passed in this way. Ultimately, we didn't have a child, and the gap between me and Roy remained. Switching to part-time work and starting infertility treatments, this past year has flown by in a flash. Yet, it's also been the most challenging and painful period of my life. But recently, there's been a change. Roy suddenly started being nice. Not just a little, it was a significant change. It was as if he had become a completely different person, showing more concern for me than ever before. For example, in a month when the infertility treatment didn't work, and I was feeling down, he said, "You okay? How about I make dinner tonight? I can whip up your favorite beef stew." I was half touched, half suspicious. After all the times he'd looked down on me, to see such a drastic shift in behavior made me wonder if there was a catch. So, I asked Roy, "What's up? Anything good happened recently?" He relaxed his face and said, "Yeah, work's been going great. I got selected to be part of a big project. But it means I'll have to do more entertaining and weekend golf, so I might be away from home more." Up to this point, it was all good. My physical burden had lessened, and if Roy's work was going well, it meant our future was secure. If I just accepted Roy's kindness without question, there'd be no trouble. But there was one thing that bothered me. Lately, Roy had become keen on knowing my every move, so I asked him, "Hey, what's going on? You used to not care at all about where I was or what I was doing. Suddenly, Roy burst into anger. What's wrong with wanting to know what my wife is up to? Emily, are you doing something behind my back that you can't tell me? From my perspective, it was bizarre for Roy to yell over something so trivial. It seemed more like he was hiding something from me and was being overly nice to cover it up. A friend who had recently divorced told me how her husband started acting nicer just before his affair came out. That's why I started suspecting Roy of having an affair and began to closely monitor his movements as much as he did mine. Then I noticed a pattern. Roy would only go out on Tuesdays, and every second Sunday, he went golfing. On days other than those, if I asked casually where he went, he'd answer normally. But on those specific days, if I asked, he'd snap, "Geez, stop nagging me. It's annoying, you know." It was all too suspicious. I grew more convinced that Roy might be cheating and decided it was time to take serious action. A few weeks later, worn out from the ongoing covert battle with Roy, I needed a break and went on a little trip. It was about a 20-minute drive from our home, but I'd been wanting to check out this cafe that had just opened. I'd heard there might be a line, but I didn't mind waiting, so I went alone and waited for my turn. That's when I ran into my sister-in-law. She's 2 years younger than me, 29, works as a kindergarten teacher, and is bright and kind. She looks up to me like a real sister, and I dote on her like she's my actual sister. When I called out to her, she looked startled and scanned me from head to toe. She usually wouldn't do something like that, so her strange behavior had me tilting my head. "What's up?" At my voice, she blinked rapidly as if snapping out of it and, after a moment of silence, returned to her usual cheerful self. "Let's have lunch together," she suggested, so we changed the reservation to 2 people and sat down together after waiting for a bit. Over lunch, she told me a shocking fact that left me speechless, unable to even eat. After lunch, though originally planning to go home, I changed my plans. I decided to go to my in-laws' house with my sister-in-law. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from our apartment, a place I usually don't stop by. My in-laws aren't exactly fond of me, or rather, they don't like me much, so apart from Christmas, we don't see each other, making this visit quite rare. From the cafe, it's just over a 10-minute drive to their house. My sister-in-law lives alone and usually contacts her mom when she's coming home. But today we decided to go without notifying her. Today is the second Sunday. Roy was supposed to be at his usual business golf, but for some reason, when we arrived at my in-laws' house, Roy's car was parked there. My sister-in-law unlocked the door for us, and we entered. Immediately, my mother-in-law appeared and asked, without hiding her displeasure, "Oh, why is Emily here?" Just the fact that a daughter-in-law stopped by warranted this attitude. I barely managed to suppress a sigh. Then, from deeper inside the house, I heard voices of a man and a woman, and Roy and a woman popped out. Roy momentarily grimaced, but the woman smiled brightly and said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Hannah, and I'll be Roy's wife from now on." While I was stunned, my sister-in-law, with a furious look, confronted Roy and the others, demanding, "Hey, what's this all about? Explain yourselves." Roy sighed deeply. Then, looking at me with a disdainful expression, he dropped a bombshell. "I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed." Following that, my mother-in-law also said, "A useless person should just get divorced and leave," hurling awful words at me. Strangely, while I managed to stay calm and rational, my sister-in-law, trembling with either anger or sorrow, gave me a look of sympathy. Meanwhile, Roy, Hannah, and my mother-in-law looked down on me with a smug attitude, showing no remorse. Then my father-in-law, attracted by the noise, came in and immediately understood the situation, yelling, "A barren wife doesn't belong in this family. Hurry up and divorce Roy and let him marry Hannah." "Dad," my sister-in-law shouted, trying to stop him, but I slowly raised my head. And that's when I signaled my counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I was hurt, about to cry from being looked down upon like this. Defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, though. And about that woman, The implications of my words, especially the fact that I mentioned I was already divorced, left Roy and my in-laws stunned, only able to utter a pathetic huh? I wanted to expose Hannah's true identity right then and there. But instead, I sighed and said, "Roy, do you remember the fuss a while ago? When you threatened to divorce me and prepared the divorce papers. Those papers were signed, so I did my part. We're not husband and wife anymore, without needing to be told." Roy, reminded of that incident, lost his earlier composure. Instead, he began looking around frantically, his unease palpable. A few days ago, Roy and I had a fight, and in a fit of rage, he signed the divorce papers and threatened me. The cause of the argument was trivial. I had simply asked him again where he goes every second Sunday. He always evaded the question, and I thought it was about time to get a straight answer. Roy, turning red, shouted in what's become a standard response, "You always ask that. Are you trying to control me? I'm not having it." I was merely asking where he was going, but his extreme reaction to my question about the second Sunday was absurd. Still, Roy kept ranting and stormed out of the house. I wondered where he had gone off to when he returned a while later with the divorce papers. He filled in his section in front of me, then pushed the papers at me, saying, "I can divorce you anytime I want." When I asked him if he really intended to divorce, he nodded emphatically. So, I secretly filled in my section too and kept the papers in my bag, ready to submit at any time. In a way, it was like a talisman. If anything happened, I could use these papers to dissolve our marital relationship, a magic piece of paper. And today, after running into my sister-in-law and hearing a shocking story, reaching my breaking point, I submitted the divorce papers before heading to my in-laws' house. Hearing this, Roy argued, "That was just a threat, I didn't mean it." But my sister-in-law retorted, "You signed it yourself saying you could divorce any time, that clearly shows intent," leaving him speechless again. Sarcastically, I said to Roy, "So, our marriage is pretty much in ruins. Happy now?" Roy was about to say something when his mother interjected with a smug look, "Oh, is that so? Well, we were expecting you to divorce anyway, so that's fine by us." It seemed like Roy's father shared the same sentiment, nodding in agreement. To my in-laws, my divorce from Roy was inevitable, so to them, it was more of a relief than anything else. Hannah, standing next to Roy with an annoying grin, seemed pleased with herself. Noticing this, Roy chuckled smugly, "Yeah, that means I can start my life with Hannah, the first step to our future together." It was disgusting. My sister-in-law looked frustrated, as if embarrassed by these four. To me, these clueless family members and Hannah were just too foolish to take seriously. Ignoring their triumphant looks, I pulled out my phone. Then, I showed Roy and the others a photo that clearly depicted Roy and Hannah in a compromising situation. Timestamped and location tagged. I said to Roy, "I didn't file for divorce on a whim. I've been compiling evidence of your affair from the start," I declared, watching Roy swallow hard. Glancing at him, I added that I intended to demand alimony, right when Hannah burst into laughter. Frowning at Hannah, she blurted out, "So, you've been investigating me too? About that woman, guess you figured it out. I was gonna reveal that I'm pregnant. Too bad, Roy and his parents already knew and even let me stay here on purpose." My sister-in-law was shocked. When we met at the cafe, she had already been informed by Roy and my in-laws that we had divorced. The reason they gave her was shocking. They claimed I was terminally ill and had decided to break up with Roy, who had supposedly made a tearful decision. Roy had told his sister a lie about breaking up due to a fake illness. Hearing this story, I was appalled. According to my sister-in-law, Roy had cautioned her. "Emily is despairing over her life now. So, please don't contact her and accidentally upset her." Hence, my sister-in-law avoided reaching out to me, thinking it was for my own good. But upon returning home, she was surprised to find a strange woman living there, introduced as Roy's new wife by my in-laws. She had realized she'd been deceived all along. But hearing about Hannah's pregnancy was new to her. As Hannah gloated, I burst into laughter. Then turned to her. "Of course,
the detective caught that you're pregnant. But I brought something even more interesting since it's unlikely that Roy and his parents wouldn't know."
The atmosphere tensed. Everyone held their breath, wondering what bombshell I would drop next. And the moment I opened my mouth, the silence was broken, and the situation drastically changed.
"And what I wanted to say is, Hannah is pregnant with another man's child, not Roy's."
Hannah's face paled, and Roy was speechless, while his parents slowly turned their gaze towards her. I had spared no expense on a detective to gather irrefutable evidence and information beneficial to me post-divorce. I had requested detailed investigation reports and evidence, including photos with date and time stamps. By the time of our divorce fiasco, I already had enough evidence to confront Roy. The reason Roy only left on Tuesdays and every second Sunday was because those were Hannah's days off from work. Roy inadvertently dug his own grave by filling out the divorce papers, making it a windfall for me. I could have cornered Roy with the evidence I had, but I thought it was too soon. That's because the detective had mentioned that Hannah, Roy's affair partner, seemed to have a dark shadow hanging over her. So, I decided to request a more detailed investigation into Hannah. It turned out Hannah was pregnant, and Roy was aware of it. This was somewhat expected. However, Hannah insisted on going to the doctor alone, stubbornly refusing to take Roy with her. It seemed Roy thought nothing of it. But Hannah had a clear intention to keep another man from suspecting anything. In reality, Hannah was involved with another man, a married man with children, and the child she was carrying was undoubtedly his. The married man, unable to leave his family for Hannah, had agreed to cut ties by paying all expenses related to the pregnancy and a lump sum for child support upon Hannah's request. The agreement was to settle their relationship by paying child support if a test after the child's birth confirmed his paternity. Therefore, it appears that this man was always accompanying Hannah to her doctor appointments, leaving no opportunity for Roy to join. Roy, unknowingly, had dug his own grave by signing the divorce papers, making my case even stronger. I had collected evidence of Hannah entering the maternity clinic with another man and even secured audio recordings, presenting all the proof to them then and there. As Hannah grew visibly distressed, Roy exploded in anger. "You deceived me?" Me, while his parents echoed his outrage. Feeling it was too harsh to gang up on a pregnant woman, I exclaimed, "Enough. This is shameful. You're all in the wrong here. Roy for cheating, his parents for condoning it, and Hannah for planning to use Roy as a fallback. Your actions are nothing but a petty quarrel." Silenced by my outburst, everyone was left speechless. Now that things have come this far, there's no turning back. I've made up my mind. After discovering Hannah's shocking hidden side, there's no way these people could live together anymore. But what I couldn't forgive was Roy. How he bad-mouthed and looked down on me while I quit my job to focus on fertility treatments, and how he suddenly started being nice to avoid suspicion the moment he started his affair.
"I've divorced Roy, and I will make sure you all pay me alimony. Hannah, you'll be raising 2 children on your own now, but since you're the one who did this, you better take full responsibility."
After saying that casually, Hannah turned pale and exclaimed in shock, "You knew about my other child? How? Where did you?" To make it clear for Roy and his bewildered in-laws, I started to explain.
"Hannah has been letting her parents raise her child. She claims to be providing financially, but with another child on the way, things will change. Her parents are getting older, and it seems she's been looking for a new ATM to help with child rearing." I have evidence of her saying this to her friends with a laugh.
Realizing that ATM implicitly referred to him, Roy looked hurt. But he had no right to feel that way. The in-laws were flustered, and in a panic, my mother-in-law dropped her previous confident demeanor, saying, "So, Hannah's child isn't our grandchild? Then there's no reason to keep her in this house. Leave right now." Conveniently switching her stance, Hannah, in a panic, tried to defend herself. "No, it is Roy's child. Please believe me." But my sister-in-law finally spoke up. "Do you really think saying that now will make anyone believe you? Hannah, Do you not realize the mess you've made of people's lives? And with that, Hannah fell silent. Then, my sister-in-law dropped a bombshell.
Aren't you the mother of a boy who goes to the daycare where I work? The one always brought in by his elderly grandparents. His name wouldn't happen to be Henry, would it?
Hannah's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to respond but ended up closing it without saying anything. Her silence affirmed my sister-in-law's question. Shocked, my mother-in-law collapsed on the spot, and my father-in-law looked back and forth between us, panicking. It seemed like the right moment. I presented Roy with an ultrasound image, saying,
"Thanks to the fertility treatments, I successfully got pregnant with your child. I was about to tell you after dealing with the morning sickness, but then your affair became undeniable. This child is undoubtedly yours. We won't be living together, but expect to pay child support."
Roy looked devastated, but my audacious mother-in-law chimed in, "If there's a child, then she still has the right to be a wife. I'm sorry, we were just misled by this woman. Please, Emily, come back to us." Ignoring her, I turned to leave the house. As my mother-in-law called out to me repeatedly, I turned back once and said,
"What are you doing? You never liked me from the start, and once you found out Hannah was pregnant with your son's child, what action did you take? You're beyond brazen."
Taken aback by my confrontation, my mother-in-law lowered her head again. My father-in-law, perhaps realizing their folly, said nothing more. After all, they discarded me just as I no longer needed to acknowledge them as family. Stepping outside, my sister-in-law repeatedly apologized, asking if there was anything she could do. I said, "Just make sure they don't get away with this. From now on, I'll be handling things through a lawyer with Roy. And from now on, let's not be sister-in-law and sister-in-law but friends instead." Surprised, my sister-in-law nodded and said, "Let's get through this together." Following that, I hired a lawyer and demanded alimony. They pleaded inability to pay the substantial amount I demanded, but after I threatened legal action and assured them of my relentlessness, they reluctantly agreed. Hannah's affair with the married man came to light, leading to a confrontation and eventually reaching his wife's ears, causing an uproar. Consequently, overwhelmed by our demands, Hannah turned to her parents, who, after scolding her, came to us to apologize and settled the amount in full. Hannah desperately turned to her parents' home for help. Naturally, she was severely scolded by her parents, who then dragged her to our place to apologize. After giving birth, Hannah will have no choice but to work from dawn till dusk, making it impossible for her to indulge in affairs ever again. Despite being incredibly irresponsible, given she has children, Hannah is now under the strict financial control of her parents, unable to find any release for her stress. Having lived selfishly until now, I hope she lives for her children from here on out. On the other hand, Roy faced a disastrous fate as well. While it was good he paid me the alimony, he had to sell the family home to come up with the money. Now, he and his parents are huddled together, living in a cramped, run-down apartment. Although I agreed to allow him to pay child support in installments, as expected, there were defaults. He probably thought a little delay would be fine, based on whatever he read online. I had warned I would be relentless. I promptly took legal action for enforcement. This resulted in his company being notified, revealing his divorce and child support delinquency. His reasons for leaving work on time to spend time with Hannah while his wife was undergoing fertility treatments were also exposed, subjecting him to scorn. Eventually, he quit his job and took on debt to pay me the child support I demanded. Now, Roy is trapped in a lifetime of debt hell, with his parents also collapsing alongside him. Roy works solely for debt repayment, and his parents can no longer enjoy a graceful retirement but must return to work. Their irresponsible blaming of each other led to daily disputes, so much so that the police were called for disturbing the peace. Now, they seem to be working quietly to manage the debt, complaining all the while. Afterwards, I moved back in with my parents, apologizing and living with them for a while. Thanks to my parents' support post-delivery, things eventually got better, and my former employer even offered me my job back as a full-time employee. I also arranged for my daughter to be taken care of at the daycare where my sister-in-law works, which was a relief. Now, living away from my parents, I'm a mother raising my daughter alone, but I'm managing well thanks to the support and kind words from those around me. I've decided to cherish these invaluable connections and raise my precious daughter to be a fine person.
What?
Suddenly, my husband splashed beer on me, exclaiming, "What's with that attitude? You're just a parasite living off me. If you have a complaint, then get a divorce and leave. Someone like you is just in the way." Somehow, he produced a divorce paper already filled out with his name and threw it at me. Divorce. Under normal circumstances, one would panic, but my feelings were different. Rather, I had been longing for these words. All right. I accepted far more readily than I believed possible.
Huh?
My husband was taken aback by my calm acceptance. Ignoring my surprised husband, I calmly began to prepare to leave the house. However, he seemed to think I wouldn't really leave, and while he laughed at my preparations, that laughter would only last until today. He's about to learn what it means for me to be gone. By then, his smug smile will turn into an expression of utter misery. My name is Emma. I'm a 43-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Ryan in a quiet residential neighborhood. Ryan and I started dating about 10 years ago, introduced by a mutual friend. From dating to marriage, it took about 2 years. Looking back, I wonder why I decided to marry Ryan. It's a mystery. He was so quiet initially, responding to my attempts at conversation with brief yes or okay answers, making it honestly boring to be around him, and I thought we would break up soon. But before I knew it, we were married. Well, all of that was Ryan's fault for what he said.
I will make you happy. I promise to make you happy. You won't have to suffer, trust me.
He proposed, sounding like something out of a drama. The moment I heard it, I wondered if he was deluded about himself. But Ryan's face was so serious, I couldn't help but laugh.
I didn't expect to hear something like that.
And your answer is?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
And so, we became husband and wife. After getting married, we moved into the house my father used to live in. My father had been talking about returning to his hometown to work for a while, and in the course of those discussions, he frequently suggested, "Why don't you live here?" With our marriage, the timing aligned, and thinking of the future and the convenience, we decided to live here. I believed we would have a happy married life together. "Here you go," my husband said, throwing an envelope at me as he returned from work. It was white one.
Thanks. It's not thanks. It's thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, Ryan seemed satisfied and went to change into his casual clothes. Opening the envelope, it contained $600. This isn't enough, I muttered to myself. The envelope thrown at me by my husband contained $600 for our monthly living expenses. Since getting married, the living allowance he gave me was just $600 a month. Electric bills, gas, water bills, plus groceries and everything else. Fortunately, not having to pay rent does help a bit. I've told my husband countless times that this isn't enough to live on, but every time, the response I get from him is awful.
Huh? You should be grateful to even get $600. I'm busting my back every day, working long hours and enduring stress from my bosses. And you're telling me to give you more because it's not enough? For a mere housewife like you?
It's always like this. He claims he's having a hard time, working hard every day to support the house, so I shouldn't nag. It always happens. Yes, I get where he's coming from. But that's a separate issue. Trying to reason with him only sours his mood and makes the atmosphere at home terrible. In the end, I cave, and it's as if nothing happened. The shortfall in the living expenses, I cover by dipping into my savings from when I was working. This has been going on since we got married. Where did all those promises from his proposal go? My dissatisfaction with my husband, who seems oblivious to any happiness, just keeps piling up, while he continues to live as he pleases. as if he were the king of his own little country. Hey, beer.
Yes, oh, sorry. We're out of beer.
Huh? What do you mean there's no beer? I told you before to always keep it stocked, didn't I?
Sorry, I was so busy with house chores, I couldn't go shopping today.
Despite explaining my reasons, it's as if my words don't even reach his ears.
Don't give me excuses. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? Then household chores are your job. That includes shopping. The only thing that can soothe me after a hard day's work is a beer. And you ruined that. You destroyed my moment of bliss.
Once it gets to this point, anything I say is futile. All I can do is listen to his rant. Then, watching for a moment, I say, I'll go buy it right now.
Hurry up. My precious time is ticking away while we're talking.
Dressed in my house clothes, I dashed to the nearby supermarket to buy beer. I ran back home with the beer. By the time I arrive, I'm out of breath, with sweat dripping down my forehead.
I'm back, here's your beer.
My husband, lying on the couch and yawning, snatches the beer from me. Then, sitting up, he takes a sip.
This is it. Nothing beats beer after a long day. Glad you like it.
You look tired, and you're sweating. You smell a bit, too. Go take a shower. As if it's my fault I ended up like this. His thoughtless words hit me hard, both irritating and shocking me. Really, he only thinks about himself. A month has passed. My husband is still only concerned with himself, not caring at all about me or the house. His absolute dominance is almost impressive at this point.
You're not going to see me off to work. I'm in the middle of laundry and can't stop right now. I don't need excuses. Don't make me say this so early in the morning.
Sorry. With a click of his tongue, my husband heads off to work. I watch him leave until he's out of sight, then return inside the house. The moment I close the door, I let out a deep sigh. How long do I have to keep living like this? Regret for marrying him and negative feelings about my future life surge through me. Even doing my usual chores feels impossible today. I zone out while looking at the garden. Having a day like this once in a while might be nice. I tell myself, almost as an excuse, that I've worked hard enough up until now. Then, the cell phone I had placed nearby starts ringing. It's my husband calling. I debate whether to answer it or not, almost hoping he'll give up during my hesitation. But the call from my husband doesn't stop. I sigh deeply once more. And then, deciding to face whatever it is, I answer the phone.
Hello? Why don't you answer right away? How many times do I have to call? I'm sorry, I couldn't pick up right now because my hands were full.
Well, whatever.
What's for dinner tonight?
I'm surprised. He's never called to ask what's for dinner before. What's this about?
I'm still thinking, but maybe beef stew, it's been a while.
Huh? What? His cryptic behavior is troubling me.
What's going on?
My colleague said he's going to eat steak after work today.
And then, he asked what's for dinner at my place today.
What do you think?
What do you mean, what do I think? Don't you think it's strange? My coworker's eating fancy steak while I'm stuck with stew. How come I, his senior, have to eat cheaper food than my colleague?
His dissatisfaction is clear from his tone. He's envious of his coworker getting to eat something as nice as high-quality meat. Meanwhile, he's at home eating stew. Clearly, he wants to eat something even better than steak. He wants something that would make his coworker jealous. He wants to be thought of as amazing.
You know we can't afford that kind of luxury, right? If you really want it, you'll have to figure it out yourself.
Indeed, we don't have the means to eat such fine foods. Of course, if he's willing to pay for it, that's a different story. But that's unlikely to happen with him. It's really pathetic.
Don't you care at all? That I'm falling behind someone like my colleague?
Don't you, as my wife, feel anything about this? But what can I say? We simply can't afford it. He doesn't seem to understand that at all.
If it were possible, I would do it. But as I said, we don't have the means for that, do we? Especially when you give me so little for the household expenses.
I couldn't help but complain. Immediately, he retorts sharply.
What? Do you even understand how hard I'm working to earn money? And there you are, just living off of me, daring to complain. If you have complaints, why don't you manage the household chores better? Other housewives are perfect at managing their chores, not you. You're the only one who complains to the breadwinner. I didn't say that much. I'm just asking for enough to cover our monthly expenses. That's what's annoying. Who do you think you are? If you're going to complain that much, why don't you work and earn some money yourself?
His anger explodes. At this point, there's nothing I can do but apologize. I'm sorry. I've been too demanding. This usually smooths things over quickly. But this time was different.
You think you can just apologize and everything will be fine? You think I'll just forgive you? No one's going to forgive that. The anger I've accumulated over the years won't be settled with just your apologies.
His reaction was unexpected. His anger had been significant until then. It was all over the difference between having high-end meat or stew.
There's no need to get that angry.
It's fine.
Talking to you is just a waste of time. I won't be coming home tonight. Do whatever you want.
See ya.
Wait.
The call was disconnected. I never thought it would come to this. The next day, my husband didn't return home. Was it really that terrible for him? Just because of one meal's content, to show such anger? I pondered if I was at fault and considered apologizing to my husband, but each time I thought, am I really to blame? After all, it all started with his unreasonable demands, not understanding the household matters. Each time I questioned myself, I could feel my heart growing heavier. Still, as a wife, I had no choice but to support my husband and keep telling myself that. About a week later, my husband came back.
I've been away for a while, but this place is covered in dust. Did you even clean? This is my castle, you know? I can't understand how you could leave it dirty like this.
I did clean, but I've been feeling a bit under the weather recently. Maybe I couldn't do as much as I wanted to. Despite everything, I found myself wanting to rely on him. I didn't do anything specific. Just a few kind words would have been enough. However, the words that came out of his mouth were far from kind.
Get the dinner ready. Are you going to leave your tired husband who's been working all this time unattended? Couldn't become a good wife in a week, huh? In the end, you're still the same useless wife, aren't you?
After a week of not knowing where he was or what he was doing, to come back and immediately hurl insults at me. Hoping for his kindness was futile. So, this is how it's going to be. In the next moment, I felt a sense of lightness I had never experienced before. This was new to me. As I was trying to understand what was happening, hey! Are you listening? Get the dinner ready. And don't forget the beer, he lashed out again. But this time, something in me had snapped, and I responded to my angry husband with a nonchalant attitude. Seeing this, he suddenly stood up, went to the fridge himself, and took out a cold can of beer. And then...
What?
Suddenly, he doused me with beer. What's with that attitude? You're just a parasite living off me. If you have a problem, then let's get a divorce and you can get out. Someone like you is just in the way. Out of nowhere, he threw a divorce paper with his signature already filled out at me. Divorce. Under normal circumstances, one would panic, but my feelings were different. I had actually longed for these words. All right. I accepted it more readily than I could believe.
Huh?
My husband was taken aback by my calm acceptance. Ignoring him, I calmly began to prepare to leave the house. However, he seemed to think I wouldn't really leave, and laughed at my preparations, but that would only last until today. He was about to learn what it meant for me to be gone. By then, his smug smile would turn into a face of utter misery. 3 days later, I returned to my father's house. During that time, my ex-husband called me multiple times, but since we were divorced, I naturally ignored them. Even after such a clear decision to divorce, I couldn't understand why my ex-husband would still call. The day I was told to leave and get out. When I was carrying my bags outside, waiting for a taxi, my ex-husband must have never thought I would actually go. Now, putting on such an act is pointless. My decision to divorce won't change. If you insist, I won't reconsider the divorce, though. Reconsidering? As if he had the right to say that. While all this was happening, the taxi arrived. The driver helped me with my luggage, and I got into the taxi. It seems that was when my ex-husband finally realized this wasn't a joke, as he frantically tried to stop the taxi as it began to drive away, but it was too late. Leaving my ex-husband standing there, the taxi drove off, and he could only watch in a daze. Even now, when I recall the sight of my ex-husband at that moment, I can't help but feel a sense of schadenfreude. After all the things he did to me, it's only natural.
Emma, I'm going out for a bit, so I'm leaving the house in your care. Take care.
Life with my father is incomparably more comfortable than when I was living with my ex-husband. While my father is at work, I take care of the household chores. No more being accused of just sitting around doing nothing. I can't help but savor the joy of a life without stress. Then, I received a message on my phone. It was from my ex-husband. He probably thought emailing would be effective since I wasn't answering his calls. Like I'd fall for that. I thought and left the email unattended, moving on to preparing dinner. After all, there's no need for me to interact with him anymore. However, the messages from my ex-husband didn't stop. What's more, he even started calling again. That's just like him. Probably, the continuous ignoring hurt his pride too much to bear. Though I intended to keep ignoring him, the relentless calls and the barrage of messages became too much of a hassle, and I finally answered.
How many times do you think I've tried to reach you? And you've ignored every single one. You know you're supposed to respond immediately to my calls, no matter what. That applied when we were living together. Now that we're divorced and living separately, that no longer holds any weight. Besides, I'm in the middle of preparing dinner right now, so could you not bother me?
With a tone more defiant than before, my ex-husband's anger was palpable even through the phone.
What's with that attitude? Don't think you can treat me like this and just get away with it.
Always so domineering and threatening, my ex-husband was.
I've had enough of this.
Goodbye, then.
What? Hey, wait.
I hung up the phone. He continued to call many times after that, but I ignored all his attempts. I blocked his number, and that was the end of it. I returned to my interrupted dinner preparations, and about an hour later passed. I was almost done. That's when it happened. The doorbell rang. I went to the door, expecting a guest, only to find my ex-husband standing there.
So, you were here after all. You've made a huge mess, you know. Let's go now.
Unbelievably, he had left work early and sped here in his car. The intensity of his obsession made me step back in fear.
Quick, come on.
He tried to drag me out forcefully, grabbing my arm.
Stop it. Shut up. If you don't listen, I'll have to take measures.
As he raised his hand to strike, I resisted with all my might. The struggle continued at the doorstep, attracting the attention of neighbors who gathered around, watching us with curious eyes. To avoid attracting more attention, let's go inside and talk. However, strangely, my ex-husband refused to enter. Despite my insistence, he absolutely refused to come in. It was odd. Upon closer inspection, my ex-husband seemed to have a fearful look in his eyes. Could it be? I thought, just when a car horn sounded from behind. It appeared the crowd gathered in front of our house was blocking the way, making it impassable. However, this horn sounded familiar to me. Wait, that sound is... Then, the car that had been honking parked in front of the house. The door opened, and out stepped my father. Seeing my father, my ex-husband instantly let go of my arm, his previously bold demeanor disappearing as he quietly looked down. My father addressed the frightened ex-husband in a calm and gentle tone.
Ryan, it's been quite a long time, hasn't it? I'm glad to see you're doing well. It's been a long time. You look well too.
Standing in front of my father, my ex-husband froze, hardly moving.
So, what brings you here? I hope you're not here to take my daughter back, are you? Oh, no, that's not.
Fumbling for words, my ex-husband began to visibly shake.
What's got you so frightened? I haven't said anything strange, have I? I just mentioned how you threw beer on my precious daughter, called her a parasite, and then slapped a divorce paper on her and kicked her out of the house.
Now, I'm curious what you could possibly want with her now. My father said, his voice carrying a hint of menace. Feeling the weight of my father's presence, my ex-husband started to back away. But my father didn't let up.
Well? Aren't you going to say anything? What's the reason for your visit?
Then my ex-husband looked at me and said,
I was tricked by Emma. That's why I kept calling her. But Emma ignored all of it, so I came here today to have a proper conversation.
Tricked? In what way?
It's about the house. That house was supposed to become mine, but then this happened.
This happened. That incident was the reason behind my ex-husband's persistent calls and messages. That was actually a small act of resistance on my part.
Yours? When did anyone ever say that? Sorry, but I've never said anything like that, and neither did my father. What? Are you kidding me? Didn't your father say I could live in that house when we got married? I haven't forgotten.
To think someone could be so deluded. It was especially enough to claim such a thing in front of their father-in-law.
You're way off. Dad only said it might be good for you to live there. Right, Dad? That's correct. I may have said you could live there, but I never said it was yours to have. Then, at least do something about them.
Them, the reason he had been incessantly contacting me, and the house my father had allowed us to live in belonged to a friend of his.
A friend? That intimidating-looking guy? He might look tough, but he's actually very kind once you get to know him. Tom has been a friend of my dad's for years, helping him start the company where my dad is the president.
Tom has been a longtime friend of my father, and together they founded the company. My father serves as the president of this company, while Tom supports him as the vice president.
You're kidding! Your father's the CEO? Why didn't you say anything sooner? Sorry, it slipped my mind with all the moving and other stuff going on. Dad was also quite busy back then, weren't you? Yes, at that time, we had a major deal going on, and things were hectic. I stayed here, and Tom handled things over there. He really helped me a lot.
My father's company, involved in construction, has grown to the point where it receives requests from all over America.
The client was based here, and Dad had to travel back and forth every day for the deal. It became too hard, so he moved back here for easier access to the deals, leaving Tom to manage things there. Then, that house is... As I've said before, it's not yours. The house was given to us under the condition we manage it. If Tom is coming back, that means you have to leave.
Upon hearing the truth, my ex-husband's face turned pale, and he bit his hand in shock.
No way! I told my boss and my colleagues that my house is a high-rise condo. That it was mine. Now what? That's something you did on your own. I have nothing to do with it. You'll have to figure it out yourself.
My ex-husband had misunderstood that he had been given the house by my father. His self-serving interpretation of the situation had led to this pitiful outcome. How pity. It was then that his phone rang. Glancing at the screen, my ex-husband screamed and threw the phone away, collapsing onto the sofa and muttering incoherently. And he was collapsing onto the sofa and muttering incoherently. Picking up the phone, I saw the call was from his boss. And there were messages from colleagues as well.
We're at your house right now. They're saying this isn't Ryan's house. I'll call you, so please answer.
Almost immediately, another call came in. I tried to hand the phone to my ex-husband, but he buried his face in the sofa, mumbling unintelligibly, motionless. Driven by his pride, my ex-husband had always tried to present himself in the best light. He would spend his monthly salary on treating others, trying to convince everyone he was wealthy. This incident exposed his true self, leading to a breakdown of his character. I forcibly took my motionless ex-husband to the car and drove him to meet his colleagues. Seeing him in this state, they were speechless, recognizing a side of him they had never seen before. Perhaps out of fear, they ran away. Afterward, my ex-husband was laid off from his job. The company had deemed there was no hope for his return and decided to let him go. He's now back at his parents' home, recuperating. Despite our divorce, there's still the matter of money he owes me. Currently unable to work, his parents have covered his debts, tearfully apologizing to me. While it left me with mixed feelings, that's just how things are. I hope my ex-husband can repay the kindness his parents have shown him. As for me, here are the documents for the next deal.
Thank you. But this makes things difficult.
If you keep saying that, we'll fail the next deal. You need to focus.
Good grief, I sure have got myself some employee.
I've since joined my father's company and am living a fulfilled life, very different from before. Balancing housework and my job is challenging, but it's nothing compared to what I went through before. Lynn, you did great with the birth. She's a cute girl, looks just like you. Now, I finally get to be a father.
I'm so happy too, Tom. Let's be happy together from now on.
Caught up in my own reasons for being at the hospital, I found myself fixated on a couple. The man was holding a newborn, watched over tenderly by the woman. It could have been an ordinary scene. If not for the fact that the man was my husband, Tom, and the woman was my sister, Lynn. I took a video from the shadows, quietly focusing the camera while suppressing my shaking hands and voice, and snapped a few photos too. Trembling with anger, I knew I couldn't afford to be discovered, so I kept silent. After finishing, I sent the evidence to certain people all at once. Meanwhile, my husband and sister continued to look at each other with happiness, completely unaware of my presence. Watching them from the shadows, I muttered, "Tom. Lynn. I'll make sure everyone celebrates this, just you wait." Leaving only a cold voice behind, I was surprised at my own calmness as I left the hospital. I was determined not to let them be happy. As soon as I made up my mind to do so again, my body stopped shaking. 3 days later. At around 3:30 p.m., Tom finally came home. Suppressing the urge to confront him immediately, I greeted him with an innocent face. "Welcome home, Tom. You must be tired, right?" "I'm home." "Yeah, this business trip was tough. It all happened so suddenly." He sighed heavily, taking off his tie and removing his slightly wrinkled black suit jacket. I took it and hung up as usual, not forgetting to flash him my best smile. "More importantly, I'm really sorry for bailing on our anniversary. I'll make it up to you. It's a special day for us, after all." My husband looked remorseful, lying perfectly. I knew the truth, there was no business trip. He canceled our anniversary to meet my sister. He obviously didn't know I was aware of. Despite being fed up with his lies, I knew I needed to bide my time for the sake of getting back at them properly. "It's okay. You were working, after all. You're working hard for our family. I won't complain. Besides, standing around won't get you rested. Dinner's ready, so come on in." I was quite impressed with my own acting, treating him as if nothing was wrong. Completely fooled, he relaxed and followed me into the living room, showing a relieved smile. When the door opened, my husband, Tom, let out a whoa, which almost made me laugh because it was exactly the reaction I expected. It was no surprise he was shocked. The room was so packed with people you couldn't even see the floor. There were about 30 people in total. The moment Tom opened the door, all eyes were on him. "Tom, you're back. We've been waiting for you. Dad, Mom, aunts, and uncles. What's going on here?" Come on, don't just stand there. Find a place to sit. The 30 people gathered were Tom's relatives. Though everyone was silent as if at a wake, they all stared at him. Tom swallowed hard in this strange atmosphere. I forced my bewildered husband to sit and made him join the circle of relatives. Thank you all for waiting so long. My husband Tom has finally returned from his business trip. We were supposed to celebrate our anniversary yesterday, but a sudden work trip came up for him. However, I have no complaints because work comes first. Tom is always so dedicated to his job, and I respect that about him. Even as I greeted the relatives, Tom still looked at me with a puzzled expression. As you all know, Tom works for the construction company run by his father and is making great strides as his successor. Despite his busy schedule, his continuous effort is truly admirable. However, he does have one concern. The relatives remained silent, hanging on my every word. With the compliments, Tom finally began to relax and listen. Like his father chose him as a successor, there will come a time when we have to think about who will take over from Tom. Unfortunately, we do not have any children. I am infertile. Ah. Sympathetic murmurs rose. I smiled at the relatives, acknowledging their concern. Fortunately, Tom has been very supportive of fertility treatments. I wanted to give him a child of our own more than anything, so I immediately started going to a fertility clinic. But what I actually found there was an unbelievable betrayal. The smile faded from my face. I looked at Tom with a cold gaze, and he looked back, confused. Sarah, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Did I do something?
Tom, you weren't really on a business trip, were you? You went to the hospital, right? Near my sister's house, in Sacramento. Mentioning the specific hospital seemed to change his complexion instantly. While I thought how fake his "what did I do" sounded, pointing out the truth made him quickly respond. What are you talking about? I was on a business trip. I told you before I left, to our client in Arizona. So, Arizona. Just to clarify, you were in Arizona from the first day of your 3-night, 4-day trip, right?
That's right. I took an early plane and just got back.
Thank you for confirming. Then, what's this photo about?
I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I took 3 days ago. It was of him and my sister Lynn, cuddling up close with a newborn. Tom recoiled in shock, but quickly tried to compose himself for excuse time. This must be someone who looks like me. I was definitely on a business trip. I've been working hard to earn even a little more to support Sarah's fertility treatments. It's cruel to doubt a man who's been working his tail off. I might be a great actress, but my husband could be a leading man. He fluently laid out his non-existent innocence, appealing to the relatives that he was the victim. Tom has always had a good front. If I didn't have solid evidence, I might have been moved by sentiment and forgiven him.
How about we check out this video then?
I played the evidence video from another folder. Tom's voice could be heard clearly, talking. Lynn, you did great with the birth. She's a cute girl, looks just like you. Now, I finally get to be a father. Sarah really is worthless, isn't she? Not being able to give me a child of my own. A woman who can't have kids is done for. What did she think we got married for? When the playback ended, Tom's face was as pale as a sick person's. Sweat was beginning to form on his forehead, clearly panicking. While thinking to myself that this is just the beginning, I patted Tom on the shoulder and explained cheerfully. Congratulations on the birth. Surprised to see all the relatives gathered all of a sudden? I called them to celebrate the arrival of the successor. Are you pleased? The relatives, led by the in-laws, all had furious expressions. The sweat on Tom's forehead increased, turning into cold sweat. My husband, who had been so high-minded in thinking I could do nothing, would never have dreamed that he would be trapped. He looked at me with a question mark over his head and pressed on. Why? How long have you known about us? Well, if I have to say, I've been suspicious of you since the beginning of our marriage. You were very kind during our dating period, but after we got married, you started to have more secrets. You were always clutching your phone, even at home. Suddenly, you had more overtime and weekend work. I've been suspicious early on. But at first, there was still some consideration for me. So I didn't confront you or go as far as to investigate. I really loved you, Sarah, though. Yeah, let's just go with that. But any bit of consideration you had vanished the moment you found out I was infertile. That's when I was sure you were cheating. So, when you said you were going on a business trip and left the house, I followed you to the hospital. I had long realized you and Lynn were in a deep relationship. As I finished explaining the sequence of events, Tom was shaking with anger. Apparently done with acting. It's your fault for not being able to have children, he muttered under his breath. The relatives opened their eyes wide in disbelief, bracing themselves against Tom's words. Just like Sarah said, I wanted a son to inherit the business. It's a natural thought for someone in my position. But the wife who's crucial to that can't have children. What choice did I have but to find someone else?
Why did it have to be Lynn? If it had been someone I didn't know, maybe I wouldn't have been so resentful.
Lynn lived alone and had been estranged from Sarah for a long time. She knew I was married, making it easy to explain the situation quickly. She was the perfect affair partner. Unlike you, she had a nice body. Tom played the victim, blaming me and shamelessly putting me down. I had reached my limit, but even more so, my father-in-law punched the wall with his fist. The impact was so strong, it felt like the house could shake, and Tom's shoulders jerked.
What are you doing, hurting Sarah without apologizing for what you've done? I'm ashamed of having touted you as an excellent successor. It seems I made a mistake in raising you. I'm going to remove you as my successor. What? But I did it thinking of the company's future. Please, have mercy. Silence. If you can't even protect the closest person to you, your wife, how can you protect the company? A CEO must bear the future of many people. Don't underestimate management.
At my father-in-law's words, Tom hung his head and bit his lower lip. He showed no remorse towards my complaints, but was completely defeated by his father's words. In the end, Tom had always taken me lightly. There's no way two unequal people could continue a married life. I sighed inwardly. I managed to get Tom to admit to his affair, and that's enough for today. Talking to you alone won't solve this mess. We'll discuss this again after Lynn is discharged from the hospital. All the relatives turned their eyes to Tom. Their looks were as cold as ice. Tom nodded silently at my words. For a while, I would be living alone at our house, waiting for the day we could talk. I really wanted to resolve the issue as soon as my sister Lynn got discharged from the hospital, but going out with a newborn wasn't possible. Though the baby was born from Tom and Lynn's affair, the baby wasn't to blame, so I decided to wait a bit until things settled down. As for Tom, he's been living with his parents-in-law. He must be feeling like he's sitting on pins and needles. I keep getting nagging messages from him saying, "Do something about it." I haven't replied even once because it's not my problem. 3 months passed, and I invited my sister and Tom, along with my parents-in-law, back to our house. The baby seemed to have a firmer neck, looking quite stable. Lynn appeared a bit more composed, so I thought we could have a proper conversation now. I started by explaining to Lynn what we had discussed at my house last time. Just to summarize the situation, everyone here, including Dad and Mom-in-law, knows about you and Tom having an affair. So, no need for lies or excuses. Knowing that he was my husband, why did you decide to have an affair with Tom? I want you to tell me that. I heard from Tom, but it seems you really know everything. Then, there's no need for me to say anything, is there? Lynn, please answer seriously. It's your fault for not being able to have Tom's child. You just lounge around all day as a housewife, being supported by your husband. And yet, you can't fulfill your husband's desire. Isn't your existence pointless? Not contributing to society either through work or raising children, you're just a useless being. Lynn laughed at me mockingly. Yes, this is the kind of person she is. Remembering the past, I started to feel sick. Actually, our parents died when I was very young. So, my older sister Lynn was like a parent to me, but even back then, she would frequently belittle me. A crybaby, useless, a leech. Even as an adult, I haven't forgotten those words. Lynn twisted her face in ugliness and spoke to me as if spitting out. After all I've done to raise you, you forget my kindness and blame me? I was just fulfilling Tom's wish. It's your fault for being useless. I am grateful for you raising me. But Lynn, you started to make use of me, didn't you? That's why we haven't been in touch lately. I don't think it's right to keep pushing your favors on me. I sacrificed my time for you, didn't I? Asking for a little favor in return should be okay. It seems she has no intention of reflecting on exploiting me. Indeed, I understand that she spent her valuable time taking care of me. But just because I was in middle school, leaving all the household chores to me, making me prepare her lunches, give massages, and order me around like a slave seemed a bit much. After graduating high school, I left home as if I was fleeing. As my sister and I were arguing, my mother-in-law raised her hand to speak.
May I say something? We might not understand everything about your past, but your affair with our son is a separate issue, isn't it?
That's right.
No matter how much you may have been indebted to her in the past, it is wrong to associate yourself with cheating, because it is sinful to begin with.
What, you're Tom's parents, but you're taking Sarah's side, a stranger? I'm the one who gave birth to your grandchild, not Sarah. I should be thanked, not blamed. What are you saying? They were dumbfounded by my sister's selfishness. I think she genuinely doesn't have a sense of wrongdoing. Her self-centered reasoning continued.
After all, it's just an affair, right? Why make such a big fuss? Since Sarah clearly had a fault this time, it's her fault for being cheated on.
The sister's words seemed to encourage my husband, who had been lying face down for a long time, and before long he stood up straight and began to speak forcefully.
That's right. If Sarah could have given me a successor, I wouldn't have had the affair in the first place. There's no reason to continue being a couple with Sarah. I'm divorcing you. I'll build a new family with Lynn and our child.
At Tom's statement, my parents turned red with anger and lashed out at both of them.
What nonsense are you spouting? Boldly marrying your mistress. How immoral can you be? I'm ashamed you're my son. If you're serious about divorcing Sarah and marrying Lynn, then you're no son of ours, a complete stranger. We won't recognize that child as our grandchild either.
It's okay, I'll make Lynn and this child happy. Tom took a divorce papers out of his pocket and slammed it on the table with force. I was honestly surprised that Tom had prepared divorce papers. As it seemed, he was completely defiant. He had no intention of backing down, staring straight at me. My parents-in-law looked as if they were about to collapse. I'm serious. This divorce papers is the proof. I've already filled in my part, so you just submit it. Well, goodbye. Dad. Mom. Saying this, Tom left with Lynn and the child before the parents could stop him. My parents-in-law and I were left staring dumbfounded at the door through which the three of them had exited.
I'm so sorry for our foolish son. I can't believe our child would do something so reckless. Please let us apologize. No, I'm sorry for my sister's actions.
We all apologized to each other. Having a soap opera-like drama unfold within my own family is truly embarrassing, but I have no intention of just looking the other way.
I won't let this end here. You two have acted against basic human decency, and I'll make sure you regret it.
Sarah, if there's anything we can do, don't hesitate to ask. That's right, we're on your side. Feel free to lean on us anytime. The kindness of my in-laws deeply touched me, especially since I lost my parents at a young age. Afterward, I completed the unfinished divorce papers and submitted them to the office. It's strange how a single piece of paper can change family members back into strangers so easily. The divorce was finalized, but of course, there's still more to be done. I demanded alimony through a lawyer from my ex-husband. The cause of our divorce was his affair, and on top of that, he had a child with another woman. The lawyer agreed that this was a serious offense and decided to demand a high amount of $50,000. I have completely cut off my familial ties with my sister. We had been estranged to begin with, so it doesn't really affect me. The house where my sister lived alone is now inhabited by her, the baby, and my ex-husband as a family of 3. Since my sister and I had no contact, the fact that her partner used to be my husband is unknown to the neighbors, and they seem to be living quietly. One day, out of the blue, I received a barrage of calls from my sister like a demon unleashed. It was about 3 months after they eloped. Knowing the reason, I decided to answer the phone.
Hello, Lynn, what's up all of a sudden? What do you mean, what's up? What's with those photos?
What do you mean? It's exactly as you see.
Don't joke with me. Why is Tom in pictures with women I don't know?
As her yelling almost broke the phone, I switched to speaker mode. It can't be helped. Tom's affair wasn't just with you. You knew from the beginning that he was a nasty man, so it's not surprising that a second or third cheating partner showed up.
That's ridiculous. Tom loves only me.
Hearing her shrill voice, I couldn't stop laughing. This justifies sending her the evidence of my ex-husband's multiple affairs. Lynn, you're quite confident in yourself. But Tom has been involved with other women besides you from the start. How do you even know that? Of course, I hired a professional to gather evidence of the affair. I was surprised to find out there were multiple other women involved, too. It's beyond sadness, it's almost a level of resignation. As I laughed genuinely, I could hear Lynn muttering, "You're insane." If my head is insane for laughing, then the parties involved in the affair must be even more broken. They easily engaged in such immoral acts. Why? Despite having me, why did he involve himself with other women? It's obvious. He said it himself multiple times. He wanted a son. By being involved with multiple women simultaneously, the chances of pregnancy increased. And lucky you were the first to get pregnant. Though, it turned out to be a daughter, not a son. Nowadays, the gender doesn't really matter, does it? Lynn was screaming on the other side of the phone. Honestly, I wish she'd stop. It might burst my eardrum, but I suppose she might be sleep-deprived from childcare, so I decided to be patient. Thinking that I'm the more mentally mature one here actually feels refreshing. Why? Why didn't you tell me if you knew that Tom had others? Aren't I your sister? Is it okay for family to be deceived? Don't just play the family card when it suits you. You were the one who started exploiting me and then pushed me away, remember? And I paused, infusing my words with sarcasm. It's just an affair, right? It's the fault of the person who got cheated on, right? That's why I didn't tell you. Damn. You. I threw her own words back at her. Lynn was left speechless, and I mentally gave myself a high five. Then, taking a deep breath, I calmed myself down again. To truly cut ties with my sister, I couldn't do it with a turbulent heart. I intentionally smiled. Lynn, thank you again for raising me. No matter what terrible things you did, that fact won't disappear. What's with you all of a sudden? Turning so meek. But that's separate from the affair. No, it's precisely because I'm grateful that I can't forgive you. Take care, goodbye. No. Sarah. Ignoring my sister who seemed to have more to say, I hung up the phone. With that, it was finally over. I'll likely never see my sister again. The reason for the insulation was my ex-husband's infidelity, but since we had always been estranged, I guess it was bound to happen. Now, having lost a husband and a family, I truly became alone. Yet, my heart felt light. Afterward, my ex-husband and sister's relationship seemed to be deteriorating day by day. Their loud arguments could be heard even late at night, troubling the neighbors. Apparently, they've even received complaints, and my ex-husband and sister kept calling, blaming everything on me. But my in-laws were there to stop their rampage. Later, when I arranged a dinner to report something to my in-laws, I took the opportunity to express my gratitude.
Looking back, Dad and Mom, you've always been on my side since the beginning of my marriage. Losing my parents early, I've come to think of you both as my real parents. Thank you for protecting me from my sister and Tom.
We're glad to hear that. We think of you as our real daughter too.
That's right. If there's anything, feel free to rely on us anytime.
Thank you. Actually, there's something I wanted to tell you both. Feeling a bit shy, my words trailed off. But then I gathered my courage and continued. I've started seeing someone new. It's still early to say where it will lead, but I wanted you two to be the first to know. I'm moving forward. I'm okay now.
Oh! Congratulations!
There's nothing happier than hearing this. Today is the best day. My in-laws were genuinely happy for my happiness. Years later, I happily remarried and, after fertility treatment, was blessed with a child. The bright days I have now are all thanks to my in-laws' support.
I'll never forget my gratitude towards them and will continue to cherish my child.
Hospital for just car sickness? We don't need that. Although he prioritizes father-daughter trips over work, my daughter always looks exhausted when she comes home. One day, after returning from a trip, my daughter looked pale, so I asked if she needed to go to the hospital. Then my husband raised his voice, saying, "No need for that." When he asked our daughter if she agreed, she slightly shivered and nodded. "We won't go to the hospital. Just let her sleep, she'll be fine." But as I insisted, my husband, annoyed, snatched our daughter's insurance card and left the house, saying he didn't want her taken to the hospital without him. 3 days later, my daughter's condition suddenly worsened, and at the hospital, she was found to be in a critical state. Upon returning home, I found police surrounding my husband, trying to shove him into a patrol car. As a child, during a family trip, I had a near-death experience while traveling. I am alive today thanks to a nurse on board. The hospital where I was taken initially provided excellent care, saving my life, as my parents told me later. I wanted to thank her, but the nurse, who had introduced herself, moved on to another patient, and I never got her name. From that experience, I dreamed of becoming a nurse to meet my lifesaver again and to be like the nurse who helped me. So I vowed to continue nursing even after getting married and having children. That was a non-negotiable belief of mine. After becoming a nurse, life was incredibly busy, leaving no time for a boyfriend. I thought if my life ended unmarried, I'd have no regrets. Nursing felt like a calling, but it was someone unconventional who pursued me vigorously because of this. He is now my husband. My husband was younger and used to visit the hospital selling medical equipment. Initially, he earned less than I did, so we both worked hard for a while. In my 20s, I wanted to have a child, but I sealed that desire away, fearing it would pressure my husband. Perhaps that was wrong, as later his hard work was recognized at work, leading to promotions and a higher income than mine. He then suggested, given his earnings, that we could start a family. I was overjoyed, yet strangely, I struggled to conceive. Finally, in my mid-30s, I successfully became pregnant, and my husband, overly protective and worried, cherished me throughout the pregnancy. I was deeply grateful for meeting, marrying, and having a daughter with him. I felt overwhelmingly happy, almost unsure if I deserved such joy. Our daughter was incredibly adorable, inheriting the best traits from both of us, making me proud even if others called me doting. My husband actively participated in parenting, being the ideal partner. Thanks to him, I returned to work sooner than expected, requesting a transfer to a daytime shift with more flexible hours, which was readily approved. My in-laws, living nearby, were very understanding of our working parent status, allowing us to rely on them when necessary. I felt immensely fortunate for this supportive environment. When our daughter started kindergarten, my husband suggested it might be time for her to start some educational lessons outside school. I remembered hearing from nurse colleagues that kids these days often start learning second language in kindergarten. The thought of my daughter needing to start such activities made me weary. A lesson is something that will not last long unless the person in question is interested in it. This was true in my childhood. My grandparents thought that since I was a girl, I should be given girly lessons, but my parents often argued that I should be allowed to do what I wanted to do. Eventually, I never took up any hobbies except for a tutoring school for exams. So, I didn't plan to force my daughter into anything unless she showed interest. Yet my husband's ideas were surprisingly similar to my grandparents. Since you're a girl, how about piano, flower arrangement, or ballroom dancing? Ballroom dancing? Not ballet? My husband says that ballet is too vulgar for a girl in tights and lifting her legs. I want my daughter to grow up to be neat and pretty. I don't want her to expose her skin to an unspecified number of men. For my part, I think it is best for children to grow up in a carefree environment. It would be better if they could study and play sports a little, but I don't intend to force them to do so. However, it is good for them to learn some sports because it is good for their health and immune system. When I was a child, I had a hard time in pool because I couldn't swim. So I suggested she might try swimming for now, but he rejected it, citing concerns about too much skin exposure in a swimsuit. Eventually, we agreed not to enroll her in any lessons during kindergarten, as forcing activities on her at such a young age seemed unwise. Differing views on a child's education are common, settled by advice from experienced mothers and my husband's parenting finished superiors. Our daughter made many friends in kindergarten, always laughing and playing, growing up healthily. She has become so well known as a beautiful girl in the street, and even to us, her parents, she has become a beautiful face. In elementary school, she became interested in piano as her close friends started lessons, leading her to start as well. Buying a grand piano was impossible, but my husband, without consulting me, bought a used one. This led to a mild argument, witnessed by our daughter, making her feel obligated to continue. I believed it was better to wait until she was genuinely engaged before purchasing. A compact electronic piano would have sufficed. She continued piano lessons until graduating from elementary school, more out of obligation to her father than passion. She wasn't particularly talented in piano, nor strong enough for competitions. She participated in school recitals, mainly to please her father, even though younger children often performed better. When she entered middle school and her piano teacher closed the studio, she quit piano. She then focused on school clubs and studying, aiming for a high school she wanted to attend. Seeing her find and pursue her interests, I resumed night shifts, returning to my original department and shift pattern before maternity leave. With my husband still finishing work on time, I could commit to night shifts without worry. I'm very grateful to him. During her elementary years, my husband had restricted her from sports, fearing injury, especially ball games, even requesting her teachers to excuse her from such activities at school. Entering middle school, she eagerly joined the popular softball team. Though she was slim in elementary school, she's now eating well, growing stronger, and her tan skin radiates health. My husband, seeing her thrive in softball, stopped insisting on traditionally feminine activities. 2 months into middle school, a rift began to form in our family. It started when even on my off nights, dinner was separately prepared for me. My daughter and I will handle our dinner. You can eat whatever you like, my husband said. Then I'll join you for the meal you've prepared. You want to take over the meal I prepared for my daughter? I didn't mean that. After a few such exchanges, it became the norm for me to eat alone, regardless of how early I returned home, as they would have finished their meal. On weekends, my husband began taking our daughter on trips. We couldn't travel much during her piano days in elementary school, so I want her to make up for it. What about me? You should just work as much as you like. Nursing is your calling, right? You wouldn't take off work for a trip, would you? It's your calling, after all, you shouldn't take a break. My husband used my passionate speech about nursing before we got married to justify not taking me on trips. Indeed, I could immerse myself in work when my husband and daughter were away. Initially, I followed my husband's suggestion to work night shifts on weekends, but it became an issue that I was always the one working those shifts. Everyone should equally share weekend night shifts, it's unfair for the same person to always work them. Once the shift schedule was adjusted, I found myself alone at home on weekends, which felt incredibly lonely and made time seem to drag on. As my daughter's summer vacation began, my husband not only took weekends off but also started taking weekdays off to travel more frequently with her. Sometimes overnight or day trips, often without telling me. Around 1/3 into the summer break, they returned from a day trip, and my daughter looked very sick, pale, and bloodless. What happened? You look really unwell. It's just car sickness. I suggested staying overnight, but she insisted on coming home. It's her own doing. I couldn't understand how he could treat our beloved daughter so coldly. Feeling distrustful of his attitude, I decided to check on my daughter directly. Knocking on her room's door, I got a response. Are you okay? Yes. But I don't want to eat. You don't want to eat? Are you sure you're not forcing yourself? I'm not. I just need to sleep. Please leave me alone. She's a teenager. She might have things she can't easily share with her mother. I decided to let her be for the night and see how she felt. However, she didn't emerge from her room even when it was time for club activities the next morning. I prepared lunch for her and left for work, calling during the day, but she never answered. Returning home, my husband was already back and retreated to his room after stating they had finished dinner. Asking about my daughter, he replied she was fine and not to bother her. Bother her? I was puzzled but couldn't get more information as he seemed averse to discussing it further. In the kitchen, I found the lunch I prepared for her untouched and thrown away. I immediately went to check on her. Are you really okay? Can I see you? But she refused, saying she wanted to sleep. The next morning, she appeared even more exhausted and slightly thinner than 2 days ago. She appeared to have lost some weight. Is it so bad you can't eat? Should we go to the hospital? I'm fine. I just don't feel like eating right now. I'm going to skip club activities today. I really wanted to take her to the hospital by force. But if she insists she's fine, I couldn't just drag her there against her will. Reluctantly, I respected her wish for that day. However, the situation changed the next night. When my daughter entered the bathroom without a towel, I went to deliver it and saw her in the changing area, about to undress. Startled, I apologized, but was shocked at her emaciated appearance. My daughter's body was so emaciated that it would be no exaggeration to say that she was nothing but bones and skin. Let's go to the hospital before you bathe. It's dangerous in your condition. I'll get the car ready in the garage. No. I don't want to go to the hospital. I chose to be this way. Don't lie. You can't play softball in that condition. While I was trying to persuade my resistant daughter to go to the hospital, my husband appeared, saying she's fine because she said so. She says she's fine with it. At her age, she probably wants to lose weight. I countered that a wrong diet is not good for her health. My husband then asked, "You're a mother and you don't understand the female mind of your daughter at her age?" He then began to talk about me as if I were an unfit mother. A nurse would know what it's like to be in such a state, wouldn't she? How can you say that nursing is a vocation if you don't know unless you go to the hospital? His rationale kept shifting, from her being fine to him deciding what's best. As a parent and medical professional, my instinct was to take her to the hospital, even by force. But sensing my intention, my husband took the insurance cards from the drawer and left. I regretted not linking my daughter's insurance to mine. Despite the cost, I decided she needed to see a doctor. I tried convincing her with promises of a female doctor and assured her not to worry about money, but she steadfastly refused. Overwhelmed by her crying refusal, I gave in, deciding to persuade her over time. But things took a drastic turn. While I was briefly away, she bathed and collapsed. Assuming she overheated, I drove her to my hospital. Although my husband still had her insurance card, I knew we could settle the difference later. The hospital accepts credit card payments, so no matter the cost, my daughter's life is irreplaceable. I had requested female doctors for any emergencies involving my daughter, so upon our arrival, they immediately accommodated us. The diagnosis revealed she had fainted due to anemia. However, the doctor's explanation continued. Shockingly, my daughter was suffering from malnutrition. I thought she was just on a strict diet. But I always packed her nutritious lunches for school, and our meals at home were healthy. Although my husband also cooked, I did it more frequently. What was going on? Then, with tears, my daughter begged for help. I've been too scared to speak up about Dad. But I can't handle it anymore. I knew my husband had high expectations for her. But I never imagined he was enforcing them. He had set an ideal body measurement for her and was forcing her into harmful dieting practices. My pelvis is wide, and I can't slim down that area. He said I'd have to shave down my bones to get thinner. She mentioned that my husband suggested doing it himself to save hospital costs. It might sound like a joke, but for my daughter, my husband's words were absolute, dominating her reality. The reason we stopped having meals together was to conceal her extreme dieting from me. She was also discarding parts of her lunch I packed, to avoid going hungry from skipped dinners, complying with my husband's demands. Gradually losing strength, she couldn't even keep up with warm-up exercises in her club activities and felt she had no choice but to quit. Their solo trips were for attending model auditions. Though told to quit the club to avoid tanning, she used sunscreen to continue secretly. As the dieting became harsher, she reached her physical limits and couldn't maintain it. Feeling powerless against my husband, she was becoming apathetic. But she sensed it was only a matter of time before I discovered everything. However, she feared my husband wouldn't pay for her desired high school if he found out. I was ashamed of thinking my husband, who actively engaged in housework and childcare, was the ideal, supportive spouse. His involvement had ulterior motives. Crafting his version of a perfect daughter during my absence, not out of respect for my wishes. My husband saw our daughter as an object he could mold at will, igniting my fury. She is not a doll but a sentient individual, not property of her parents. Realizing he didn't understand this basic fact was utterly disillusioning. I apologized to my daughter for not noticing sooner. There were signs. Like the issues with meals and vacations. I should have asked why she didn't mind getting tanned in club activities. Instead of outright opposition, my husband subtly manipulated her to quit. I then clearly told my daughter that we would divorce her father and not to worry about her school fees. Returning to my original department and working night shifts, I was earning more than my husband, who had used up all his leave for the auditions and trips, significantly reducing his basic salary. After a night's observation in the hospital, my daughter and I returned home to find a commotion and a crowd outside. Pushing through, we saw police cars and my husband being questioned by officers. A neighbor noticed me and my daughter and told us about the situation. When my husband returns home, the house is dark and our daughter is not there. He checked his daughter's room, but since there were no signs of personal belongings taken out of the house, he thought it was a sudden runaway and started looking for her. He asked around in the neighborhood and forced his way into one house. It was the home of the daughter's childhood friend. The husband did not think well of the childhood friend, but the daughter and the other child had been very close until kindergarten. He didn't like the friend, assuming he was a girl because of his feminine appearance in his younger years. Discovering the friend was actually a boy, he raged, deeming any association too premature. Our daughter, perhaps embarrassed or feeling guilty, had kept her distance since elementary school. My husband barged into the friend's home, accusing them of hiding our daughter out of spite. But the friend had moved away years ago. Only their grandparents lived there now. His rampage led to the police being called. In talking with the officer, my husband explained that we don't want any boys on our daughter to make her a model. So he went around the house checking out. He claimed to have checked several houses, with the friends seeming most suspicious, showing no remorse. Additionally, during auditions, he was approached by an agency promising to launch her career in exchange for debt collection. In fact, it turns out that it was not a debt, but a piece of fraud. It was revealed to be a scam, and several police sketches resembling my husband had led to filed complaints.
You gotta help me out here. I did all this for the sake of my little girl. And I didn't know it was a scam.
Even if you didn't know it was a scam, if you made illegal collections, you are guilty, right? I replied coldly. I don't want a criminal father for my daughter. Divorce, I declared. My daughter would no longer be at her father's beck and call. She has never wanted to be a model. I told her that I preferred cool to cute and that I really wanted to learn Aikido and karate. To the end, my husband asked his daughter for help, saying that she would just be told to tell me to say so. However, when my daughter refused to look at my husband even once, my husband's shoulders slumped and he was taken away by the police. Later, the doctor who examined my daughter contacted the police, who also questioned my husband about his treatment of my daughter. My husband still does not admit guilt to my daughter, saying that it was an education for the child. He admitted that he had gone too far in breaking and entering, even though it was a misunderstanding, but he continues to plead justification, saying that he does not think he did anything wrong and that it is natural behavior for a parent to do. As for being a part of the fraud, he says he did not intend to do so. Even though he didn't know, the way he collected the money was so outrageous that it cannot be overlooked, and the police are investigating him even more severely. Is there a big organization behind this? The police are continuing to thoroughly investigate the case with such a viewpoint in mind. My divorce from my husband was finalized through an attorney. Neither my daughter nor I have visited my husband even once. My husband told us through his lawyer that he wanted us to come, but we didn't go because there was nothing to talk about when we showed up. After that, I received a number of letters from my husband, who had grown numb. Each letter is long, about 10 sheets of letterhead, but there's no apology and reconciliation, and the contents are similar or the same each time. While apologizing, my ex-husband's skewed expressions of affection for our daughter made her feel uneasy, saying it was creepy. I couldn't bear to read them, so I returned them, but they kept coming back, so I decided to tear them up as soon as they arrived. My in-laws gave me a very polite apology. Even after divorcing my husband, my daughter remains their grandchild. She was fond of her grandparents. They told us to ask for help anytime we needed it. But given what had happened with my husband, I vowed to live independently. Although I wouldn't stop my daughter from seeing her grandparents if she wished. Thus, my daughter and I moved out of the family home to start anew near the high school she wanted to attend. She set new goals, excelling in her studies and club activities, and seemed to have made good friends, often chatting with them in front of our house after school. 2 years later, my daughter was studying hard as usual. Thanks to a department change that eliminated overtime and night shifts, she successfully got into her desired school.
Mom, thank you.
What for, suddenly?
You've always put me first this past year and kept a close eye on me. Isn't it your turn now?
Actually, a year ago, there was talk of me being promoted to head nurse. But I declined, prioritizing my daughter's study and requested a transfer to a more flexible department. It seems she somehow heard about that conversation. I'm okay now. I've made up my mind about what I want to do and won't be swayed anymore.
So, now it's your turn to fulfill your dream and save many lives.
Driven by my daughter's words, I returned to my original department when she started high school. Even though there are days I don't see her due to night shifts, I'm thrilled that she helps out at home as much as she can. Coming home in the morning and eating the breakfast she made, I think about what we'll eat and talk about tonight, feeling truly happy. I will continue to watch my daughter grow up and to be a nurse like the nurse who saved my life as a young girl, and today I live firmly on 2 feet, a nurse and a mother.